It is impossible to know what goes on in the minds of human beings. Sometimes these minds are so twisted that they lead people to commit horrific and gruesome actions. Here are the top 10 FBI's creepiest criminals. Number 10. The Atlanta Child Murders, 1979 to 1981. A chilling tale of a serial killer who preyed on young African-American children in Atlanta. The Atlanta child murders remain one of the most perplexing and chilling cases in American history. Between 1979 and 1981, 28 African-American children and young adults were found dead in and around the city. The victims ranged in age from 7 to 28, and their bodies were often discovered in or near parks, forests, and bodies of water. Despite extensive investigations by local and federal law enforcement, the identity of the killer remains a mystery. Numerous suspects were investigated, including a local teenager named Wayne Williams, who was eventually convicted of 2 of the murders. However, many people believe that Williams was not responsible for all of the killings. The Atlanta child murders continue to haunt the city of Atlanta, and the families of the victims are still seeking justice. Number 9. The BTK Killer, 1974 to 1991. A sadistic serial killer who taunted authorities with cryptic messages. Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, terrorized Wichita, Kansas for over 17 years. He committed a series of gruesome murders, including the strangulation of 4 members of the Otero family in 1974. Rader taunted authorities with cryptic messages, signing his letters with the acronym BTK, which stood for Bind, Torture, Kill. Rader was finally caught in 2005 after authorities linked him to a DNA sample found at one of the crime scenes. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8. The Green River Killer, 1982 to 1984. A prolific serial killer who murdered dozens of women in the Seattle area. Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, murdered at least 49 women in the Seattle area in the 1980s. He dumped their bodies in a secluded area near the Green River, and he taunted authorities with cryptic messages. Ridgway was finally caught in 2001 and sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. The Zodiac Killer, 1968 to 1978. A mysterious serial killer who terrorized Northern California. The Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He committed a series of brutal murders and taunted authorities with cryptic messages and bizarre ciphers. The Zodiac Killer's identity remains a mystery, and he is one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. Number 6. The Unabomber, 1978 to 1995. A domestic terrorist who sent homemade bombs to universities, airlines, and government agencies. Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, terrorized the United States for over 17 years. He sent homemade bombs to universities, airlines, and government agencies, killing 3 people and injuring dozens more. Kaczynski was finally caught in 1996 and sentenced to life in prison. Number 5. The Night Stalker, 1979 to 1986. A sadistic serial killer who terrorized Los Angeles and San Francisco. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, terrorized Los Angeles and San Francisco in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He committed a series of brutal murders and rapes, and he taunted authorities with satanic symbols and messages. Ramirez was finally caught in 1985 and sentenced to death. Number 4. The Hillside Strangler, 1977 to 1978. A pair of cousins who committed a series of brutal murders and rapes in Los Angeles. Angelo Buono and Kenneth Bianchi, known as the Hillside Stranglers, terrorized Los Angeles in the late 1970s. They committed a series of brutal murders and rapes, and they taunted authorities with cryptic messages. Buono was sentenced to life in prison, and Bianchi was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Number 3. The Mad Bomber, 1940 to 1974. A serial bomber who terrorized New York City for over 30 years. George Metesky, known as the Mad Bomber, terrorized New York City for over 30 years. He sent homemade bombs to public places, killing 12 people and injuring dozens more. Metesky was finally caught in 1974 and sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. The Boston Strangler, 1962 to 1964. A serial killer who terrorized Boston in the early 1960s. Albert DeSalvo, known as the Boston Strangler, terrorized Boston in the early 1960s. He committed a series of brutal murders and rapes, and he taunted authorities with cryptic messages. DeSalvo was finally caught in 1964 and confessed to the murders, but his guilt has been disputed by some experts. Number 1. The Golden State Killer, 1976 to 1986. A prolific serial killer, rapist, and burglar who terrorized California for over 10 years. Joseph James DeAngelo, known as the Golden State Killer, terrorized California for over 10 years. He committed a series of brutal murders, rapes, and robberies, and he taunted authorities with cryptic messages. DeAngelo was finally caught in 2018 and sentenced to life in prison. Those were the top 10 FBI's creepiest criminals. If you liked the video, put a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.